Hello, and welcome to the On Frequency webinar series provided by ForeFlight as part of the Spirit of Aviation Week for EAA 2020. This is a virtual webinar series, and we are happy to be participating. You are attending a presentation of what's new in ForeFlight, advanced features, and my name is Phil Inman. I'm part of the customer success team. I'm coming to you virtually from my home outside of Houston, Texas. And it's a pleasure to bring to you the latest and greatest in ForeFlight. I'm hoping that's what you're expecting to see in here because that's what we're going to discuss at great length. Today, we're going to have a lot of content jam-packed into this short period of time. We're going to start out with a quick overview of the feature releases since 2019. And as you will see, and as most of you probably know, there has been a whole bunch of them. We're going to really jump into detail. We're going to look underneath the hood at several of what I would consider the most leveraging new features that have been released during that time period. And we're going to then also, near the tail end, jump into the details of the most recent releases, namely our version 12.4 and 12.5 releases. So with that, let's remember that ForeFlight focuses on what we consider all three phases of flight, and that is the pre-flight planning that you will undertake in order to prepare for your mission, the en route execution. In other words, while you're in the cockpit, everything you've got to do in the cockpit in order to safely and as per plan execute your mission, and then a post-flight analysis that occurs after your flight is complete. Some will argue that the post-flight analysis actually is part of the pre-flight planning for your next mission, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Everybody's habits are different. Let's take a quick overview look at the feature releases since mid-2019 when we last came to you actually live and in person at Oshkosh. I broke these up into several groups. We're going to start with the base map, base app, and overlays. And taking a look at these, if you happen to see one that maybe you missed, you want to make a note of that and go back and review it. Or maybe some of these you've looked at, but it's been a while and maybe you personally have grown stale. In any case, whatever works for you, just bring into attention the many features that we have released. We've enhanced our navlog. We've provided annotation capability on the map. We've long time had it on the plates and diagrams, but now you can do it on the map. We have geo-referenced the US VFR flyway charts for those cities that have those. We've improved the functionality of being able to tap and select layers that will appear on the screen. We've improved the high-resolution base maps that we provide. Multiple selection of map layers can now be done. Several of them now can be open at one time without the overlay screen being closed. We've become more consistent with the iOS theme support that's been provided by Apple. You can tap on the distance rings to change your style. The runway NOTAMs appear in the Procedure Advisor. We have new recommended route constraints on your flight planning. Your altitude sliders now have an auto mode. You're given quick access to airspace frequencies. We have new base map elements and tapping center lines for runway information. That's a summary list. If you missed any of those, make a note and go back and take a look. Information about each of these is available on our website, and you'll probably hear me throughout the webinar make several references to the fact that you can go to www.foreflight.com, look at our support center for articles on all these, or our video library has a video on just about every single feature that we ever release. The next group, very popular amongst most of our users, are track logs, logbook, and checklists. We've enhanced the track logs, the review capability, the search capability. You can add the track logs to the logbook entries now when you send them over there. For those of you with G1000s in your cockpit, you can download and import those track logs from your avionics package into ForeFlight. Logbook is always going through a series of improvements and tweaks and enhancements. Many general area, but specifically instructor tools and remote endorsement capabilities been enhanced. We do a lot of auto calculation now, namely night times and landings and information on night times from filed flight plans. We also have greater capability of auto-filling fields. Let's not forget about checklist. Probably the biggest enhancement to checklist is it now has what we refer to as checklist speak. Checklist will talk to you as you walk around your airplane, focusing on what's in front of your eyes, touching things, testing things. Same within the cockpit. If you haven't tried checklist speak, give it a try. For those of you that do international flying and filing, we've enhanced our support there, namely Nav Canada flight plan fields, and the international Navlog template has been created. And then a lot of miscellaneous items have been added in the last year. We have enhanced our flight sharing capability. We've organized the overseas track systems and allowed you to filter on direction and the type of tracks that you'd be following. Alternate airports selections are now included in PAC. We've enhanced fuel price notes, AOPA, FBO fees. We now have AirInc, FMS flight link, uplink capability. Internet radar coverage limits have been defined and are now graphically presented. We have additional location markers that we've added for the type of airplane that you want to have shown on your screen. And you now can plan your flights by arrival time rather than just time of departure. That's a summary of the features that we're not going to talk about in detail. Let's take a look at those that we are going to talk about in detail. Takeoff and landing performance. It's referred to in several different ways. You may hear it called exactly that. You may see it described as TOLD, T-O-L-D. Sometimes we refer to it as runway performance. They're all interchangeable terms that we use for the same thing. This is a big feature release that came out. It's performance subscriptions only, and it's not always well understood by the pilot, so we're going to jump into the details of this and really test the functionality of that. 3D came out about a year ago, but we've enhanced the 3D with review capability as well as approach procedure capability review. And so we're going to go through those and we're going to see some examples and we're going to demonstrate how 3D can be used for scenario planning and testing and preparation, not just what did I fly. The document sections and the file sections of ForeFlight has been overhauled. We refer to it as Documents 2.0. We're going to jump off into that. We've got a list of procedure enhancements that I'm going to show brief and quick screenshots to demonstrate their capability. And then, as previously mentioned, we're going to jump off and look at in detail at the latest releases and the two most recently releases that we made. So let's start with takeoff and landing performance. The whole purpose of takeoff and landing performance, as every pilot knows, is you want to ensure safe takeoff and a safe landing given the runway conditions that you're faced with and the runway length that you're faced with. We now have in-app the capability of demonstrating those calculations, and we're going to go through those. We use published runway performance data that we obtain from the manufacturer of your aircraft and combine it with the current weather conditions, and then go through the same calculations you would go through manually if you were to pull out your pilot operating handbook. We're not creating any new physics calculations here, no new physics for us. We are using manufacturer's data, and we're adamant about staying with manufacturer's data to represent exactly what they say your aircraft will do in the conditions that you're faced with. We're going to warn you if the results exceed the capability of the runways. We're going to customize and have customized the inputs so it's easy for you to do scenario planning or declared distance requirement calculations. And we're going to demonstrate some of those. There's no user setup required, and as previously mentioned, it's included in our ForeFlight performance subscription plans. Now, initially when we came out, we released it with a safety factor of 1.0. We recognized pretty much immediately, and kind of knew all along, and combine that with pilot feedback, that we had to give the user the functionality to let you, the pilot, determine what the appropriate safety factor is. So we're going to talk about safety factors in pretty decent length here in a moment. You are now allowed to enter a safety factor of between 1.0 and 10.0. And then you can customize all the other inputs for easy scenario planning, as previously mentioned. So let's take a look at this. Where do you find this? Well, when you set up your aircraft in ForeFlight Mobile on your iPad or iPhone, and if you use ForeFlight performance profiles, which for performance subscribers I strongly encourage that you do, you will see in blue below every aircraft profile 2 lines. And it's demonstrated here. You're going to see the first one that says 3 ForeFlight performance profiles. These are referring to the en route profiles, the in-the-air profiles that we have built from the Pilot Operating Handbook. Now we're going to step back a minute. We're going to take a look at these in great detail. If you were to open up one of these, you're going to see that the performance profiles that we built mimic or are represented as they described in the Pilot Operating Handbook. Now, if you open up one of these, you don't see a lot of numbers as some pilots have kind of grown to expect. And the reason for that is we did not build these profiles for you to actually view the raw data. We built these so that the computer calculations and algorithms that we use can use this data to make calculations. We do provide a brief summary at the top, and then down below we provide you 2 model adjustments as highlighted in the magenta boxes. The first is a cruise speed adjustment. The second is the cruise fuel flow adjustment. You can take those slider bars and you can move them left and right to adjust for whether or not ForeFlight is overestimating or underestimating your speed or fuel flow calculations. And you'll know that after you plan a series of flights and then execute those flights, and you're going to develop a feel that ForeFlight's kind of over-guessing or overestimating or underestimating. And so I want to ratchet up or ratchet down by a small percentage and have them basically tune in to what I'm actually seeing in the air. And so it's a trial and error process, and it may take 10 or 12 flights for you to really get this honed down. But we encourage those that are interested in really high quality calculations to go through this exercise for your aircraft. Once you do that, you probably want to make that profile the default by clicking that Make Default button at the bottom. Now let's go back and you'll see the second line. And in this case, this aircraft says supports takeoff and landing performance. That signifies that ForeFlight has taken the effort and have built takeoff and landing performance calculations for your aircraft. So how do we get to that? Well, it shows up when you go to your flight planning page. And in this case, we're in flights, and we see that we have runway profiles built for our aircraft, and they represent a series of serial numbers. Now, in most cases, this is probably going to be only one entry, but you will find aircraft out there where you're going to have to select which range of serial numbers your aircraft fits into and then select that one. When you go to your planning page, you're going to see 2 boxes off next to the destination airport and the departure airport, and there's going to be the appropriate box called takeoff or landing. That signifies to you that the calculations have been performed. So let's take a look at this. We're going to start with takeoff. We're going to enter this, and at this point in time, my flight plan that I've created does not know what runway I'm going to be using, as signified by the none. So let's tap that. But before we do, let's take a look that it has loaded the most recent TAF available for my airport. This, by the way, is David Wayne Hooks Airport, my home airport down in the north part of Houston, Texas. And we're getting our TAF from Houston Intercontinental, which is just about 10 miles to the east. And it's current. So we tap the runway, and now we're given our choices. And our wind advisor is helping us. It's telling us, based on the most recent weather, if we've got a headwind, a tailwind component, and what our crosswind component is. So we're going to select 17 right. That's the big runway there, and it presents us with a headwind. So we do that, and immediately once we selected that runway, you see that we're presented with calculation summaries already. Note also that it defaults to a dry paved runway condition. And there's the calculation. It's saying I need a total of 2,451 feet to get off the ground and clear a 50-foot obstacle. Now back to the conditions. I have choices here. This information is provided in my pilot operating handbook for this aircraft. I can select wet paved, slippery paved, or if I'm on grass, 3 different types of grass. So in this case, let's go to slippery paved. I select that, and if you notice, immediately it recalculates under a changed runway condition, and now I need 3,186 feet of runway to get off the ground and clear that obstacle. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll take a look and see a summary of the data that it's using. It's taking my maximum takeoff weight of 7,394 pounds. I'm in a takeoff flap configuration. I have a safety factor defaulted of 1.0. More on that in a minute. And then it shows the calculations down at the bottom for summary on my takeoff. Now this again, what I'm showing you, I went back to dry paved, and that's the 2,451 feet required. There's that safety factor. Let's take a look at that. I said earlier that you can take 1.0 to 10.0, any number in between. Let's change it to 2.0. And if you notice, just by changing the safety factor, it lengthens all the calculations by a factor of 2. And now I'm up to 4,901 feet of necessary distance to clear that 50-foot obstacle. 3,550 of it needs to be on the ground. That's takeoff calculations. Let's take a look at the landing calculations. This particular flight plan is taking us into Eagle County, Colorado. We're going to be landing on runway 25, and we've got several factors that we can put into play here. There's the runway 25 I've already selected. We talked previously about the runway conditions. Take a look at the METAR, or in this case, the MOS, to note that it is the most recent available. And it's using it because it's using the MOS again because we will be landing at some point in time in the future. Notice also that the landing weight is different than what our takeoff weight is. ForeFlight took into account that we have burned off fuel, and so we will be landing at a different weight than we took off. And again, we are in landing configuration with our aircraft. We selected runway 25 because we have a headwind, in this case 10 knots. And there's our calculation summaries down at the bottom. Take a look at that. Again, it defaulted to a safety factor of 1.0. We need 2,562 feet to come over that 50-foot obstacle, and 1,600 of it will be ground wall on the ground when we touch down at 66 knots. Let's take a look at some of the factors now that we can put into play for purposes of scenario planning. What we previously saw was probably at best case conditions. But what if things aren't like we expect upon arrival into Eagle County? What if they're worse? What if the conditions aren't dry paved? What if our altimeter isn't 3.16? What if we don't have a 10-knot headwind? What if the temperature isn't 28 degrees Celsius? It's probably fine if it's cooler. It's probably not so good if it's warmer. And then again, I'm not comfortable using a safety factor of 1.0. So we changed all these. If you notice, we changed to a slippery paved. I took away the headwind, and now I have a wind speed of 0 knots. I increased the temperature from 28 degrees to 34 degrees. Might be a little bit of an overkill, but I'm doing scenario testing here. And I left the altimeter alone. And I also increased the safety factor of 2.0 up to 2.4. And if you notice, the combination of all those changes actually put me at a point where I can't get safely down on the runway. I'm overshooting the runway available to me by 89 feet. I generated a warning at the top. Now, this is probably a worst case scenario. I would probably argue it's an overkill, but I'm trying to make a point and demonstrate a scenario plan that you might choose to test to see how bad can it get before I really have an issue. So what did we learn from all this? We can put numerous parameters into play to test the sensitivity of the calculations. And the reason why we're testing the sensitivity is because we want to test the associated risk. Those factors could be include runway surface conditions. You could test the wind speed and direction, the temperatures, the altimeters, and of course the safety factors. So let's talk about the safety factor. I'm sure you're asking yourself, well, what is an appropriate safety factor? If it's not 1.0, what could it be? There are no rules for Part 91 operations that the FAA imparts on us, but we can refer to a document called SAFO 19001 that came out a couple of years ago that was the end result of a 13-year project that the FAA and ATC embarked on after the 2005 Midway Airport Southwest runway overrun that occurred. And they actually recommend a safety factor of 1.67 for dry, perfect runway conditions. And in that document, if you want to go to the trouble of pulling that document down off the internet, they included a table for different types of aircraft. Most of us are probably flying reciprocating type engines. So let's look at the bottom line. And again, these are recommendations. These are not regulations, at least for Part 91. Dry, perfect runway conditions, they recommend a safety factor of 1.67. As the runway conditions deteriorate, you see the safety factors go up, all the way to the worst rating that they give it, a rating of 1 for poor conditions, a safety factor of 5.1. So in absence of anything else, you might take a look at this table and see how this would best apply to you and maybe use these in your scenario planning. For your information, there's the link to that document if you want to pull it down, the SAFO 19001. That concludes our discussion on the runway safety factors and takeoff and landing calculations. Let's move on to the 3D feature that was released this past year. We initially introduced this airport 3D view about 1 year ago, where we were able to take a look just at airports. We then added 3D review and gave you the capability of selecting the camera mode. I'll demonstrate each of those for you. And then most recently, we added 3D approach view. So let's jump off into this and take a look at the 3D airport view and the point of view. If you go to your iPad, and you can get to this in any number of different directions, and you go to the airport selector, you will see the 3D view button in the upper right-hand corner. Tap that, and you'll get a 3D view of the airport. Again, we're looking at Eagle County, Colorado. Take your fingers, move it around. You can move it laterally, go up and down. You can tap the runways that you desire in the upper right-hand corner. Here you see we have runway 25. I'm panning up high, panning down low, side to side. Gives you a good pictorial description of the airport that you're going to be arriving at, or any airport for that matter. Could be your departure airport. Take a look that we have mountains in the back. This is especially valuable for airports that you're not familiar with. You can also use 3D view just about anywhere out in space or anywhere out in the country. I'm just got a random point here, and I tapped on it. Well, it's a little more than random, as you'll see here in a minute, but I tapped on it, and it obviously gives you a pop-up box that I think everybody will be familiar with. But I'm going to tap the 3D view, and it's going to give me a 3D perspective of that point that I tapped on. And when I do, you're going to see that it's Mount St. Helens. Again, take your fingers. You can pan around, pan in, pan out. Incredible detail being presented for you. "3D review came along after that. And on 3D review, you got to have the capability of following planned and recorded flights from a third-person perspective of the aircraft and of the route line. You can adjust the speed by which you want to review these files. You can manually scrub through the flight using the timeline at the bottom, or you can autoplay it at anywhere between 1 time and 20 time normal speed for a faster overview. You've got several choices in between. The camera mode buttons down in the bottom left hand will switch between the first person and third person perspective. When you're in the third person perspective, you have the capability of panning, tilting, zooming in and out to see it from any angle, and I'll demonstrate that. The route line beneath you will appear as a blue curtain for easy viewing. That's a perspective I think you're going to be familiar with from track log viewing. Speaking of track logs that are recorded with an AHRS capable device will incorporate pitch and bank in your 3D review data as it depicts the aircraft movements while in the third person point of view. This feature also is performance plan subscribers only. So let's take a look. We built the flight plan from David Wayne Hooks up to Eagle County. And there's our 3D button. Appears as a little globe on the bottom line of our flight plan builder box. Tap that, and you're taken to the 3D view of our route. Now you can do this before or after your flight. This is very helpful before to kind of pre-fly the flight that you're going to take. Take a look down at the lower left-hand corner. We are in the cockpit view perspective, as if we're looking out the cockpit at the route that we're going to take. Let's put it into motion. I'm going to change the speed manually. You notice the curtain. It's magenta underneath us, just like it would be on map view. We're going to pass that first waypoint. And now you notice the future track is magenta and the past one is yellow or orange, just like it is on the maps page. Also note the waypoint box in the upper right. You can scroll up and down in that box to select the waypoint by which you want to start. We also noted that we switched over to the third person perspective in the lower left. And so now we have the little airplane with the V below it as if we're viewing it from outside the aircraft. 3D approach preview is a variation of that, where we're previewing the procedure in the maps view via the bubble editor by tapping on 3D procedure review. It will display each waypoint along the route, including the speed and altitude restrictions, if they in fact they have them. There will be an interactive navlog, just as you saw at the top right, or on the iPhone it'll be down at the bottom, which allows viewing at each individual waypoint and will also depict the distance between them. Try tapping those waypoints because it will allow for quick access. And if you are using the set altitude speed option, it is displayed in 3D. So let's take a look at 3D approach view. As mentioned, we're going to select the approach procedure. Here I have the Voaxa LDA runway 25 at Eagle County. And when I tap that bubble, you notice I have 3D procedure review down at the bottom. I'm going to tap that and it takes me to the 3D procedure review. Now I did a real quick one on you here. This is not Eagle County. I found an approach review that I wanted to use. This is actually over in Switzerland. That's a little more interesting. So let's fly it. And you can see, because we're over mountains, you see all the same features in 3D review. I'm actually using my finger down at the bottom to scroll and scrub the timeline very fast. But you can slow that down if you want. Takes us all the way down to the runway. Notice we have valleys on either side. This is 3D approach review. Let's take a look at that one more time, because I want to point out a couple other things. Notice the altitudes with the line underneath it at each waypoint. There's a speed restriction. And as we're coming in, we're stepping down. You see the altitudes, just as you would see on your approach plate. That is 3D approach preview. Now let's move to documents. As mentioned at the beginning, we completely overhauled our documents section in 2019. We refer to it as Documents 2.0. I think you're going to find that documents are now easier to find, they're easier to download, and much easier to access. Those documents are also included in the unified app search that you have at the top of every page. You have collapsible drawers on the left, allowing quick movement between custom binders that you make and the drives that we create and offer for you. You can show both a tiled thumbnail view or a condensed list view, and I'll show you both. It supports nested folders. And you can download documents either individually for purposes of staying up to date, or the entire folder. Here's what the document section on my iPad looks like. At the top, we have binders. I created these. These are made by the user, and in this handbook binder that I created, I have 3 handbooks. Next, I have my drives. These are drives that I created. I have an imported drive, and those are files that I imported via an email or maybe through iTunes directly into my document section. And I also have a Dropbox linked up to my iPad and to my account. And then these are the drives that we offer. And we have them organized in a manner that is going to be very sensical to you. In this case, probably of greatest interest will be the FAA and the ForeFlight down at the bottom. If you scroll on down, there are even more depending on your level of subscription. I happen to have a Jeppesen drive, a Nav Canada drive, and some European drives. Let's take a look at the imported. In this case, I imported these by email, and it supports many file types. For demonstration purposes, you see that's a PDF folder on the left, an Excel spreadsheet in the middle, and then a JPEG file on the right. My Dropbox has all sorts of folders in it and files. These are nested folders that I created on my computer in my Dropbox account. And then I integrated it with my ForeFlight account, and then it moves everything over. Looking at the drives, I selected ForeFlight drive as demonstration purposes. If you notice, I have several of the pilot guides that I downloaded, but I also have some that I have not downloaded yet. Notice the 2 where you see the cover page, they have the green checkbox at the upper right-hand corner of the document. Those have been downloaded. But then the one in the middle, for example, ForeFlight Mobile Legends, hasn't been downloaded yet. If I wanted to download that, I would simply tap that, and it's going to occupy 3 megabytes of capacity on my device. Now, if I was interested in downloading everything from the ForeFlight drive, I could simply tap that 29 megabyte blue arrow in the upper right-hand corner, and it will download them all. And incidentally, when new documents come out, if I have tapped one of those boxes, they will download automatically. So if I want to keep ForeFlight drive completely up to date on my iPad, I want to tap that upper right-hand blue arrow and download them all. I mentioned earlier also that you can change the views. What you're looking at now is the icon view. But if I tap that icon in the upper left, it switches over to list view. And notice you have the green check marks and the blue download buttons with the capacities or the storage requirements, just like you did in the other view. I mentioned you can import files via AirDrop, email, iTunes, or any type of connected cloud storage account. And Pro Plus users and Performance users subscriptions do have this feature available to import. We support just about every type of file that you're probably going to ever want to import. Most commonly, probably PDFs, JPEGs, Excel, Word documents, pages, keys, numbers, things like that. Now let's take documents one step further, and we added a feature called Files and Flights. This gives you the capability of attaching files and documents and photos to a flight plan. Now we're talking about specific flight plans here. We're not talking about something that's going to be repeatable over and over and over. This is a manual process for a particular flight. Again, a wide range of file types are supported. And you can annotate those files while viewing them in flights, rename them, send them off to other apps using the iOS share sheet. By the way, when you add a file to a flight on your iPad, it will sync over and it will be present if you viewed that same flight on your iPhone. This is a performance level feature only. Let's take a look. Back to my flight plan from David Wayne Hooks up to Eagle County. You notice the box next to the briefing called Files with the black icon. Right now I don't have anything in there, but if I were to tap that, again, tells me there's nothing in there, but it gives me the familiar plus sign, indicating to me, what do you want to add? So I tap that plus, and it says, well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go add some photos? You want to go to the ForeFlight documents section of documents and add something there? Or do you want to go to the files section and add something from there? So in this case, let's look at the ForeFlight documents. I tap that, or the photos, or the files, and I added 2 files. And now it shows 2 files. And it doesn't matter what you added. Maybe some examples, or you might have run a weight and balance on this flight, and you created a summary sheet and you want to attach that. Or you have a picture, or you have an extraneous document such as maybe a listing of the passengers that you're going to take, or maybe a picture. It could be any number of documents. It's personal discretion, personal choice. Let's take a look now at several of the procedure enhancements that have been added in the last year that deserve a little bit of an explanation. So let's start with the unsupported SID star legs, where we depict a dotted routed line in order to take you to your initial entry fix. In this case, this is a departure procedure out of David Wayne Hooks. And if you notice that this SID starts at the waypoint Dremer, we're not exactly sure once you take off the runway how you're going to be vectored there. You're usually vectored by air traffic control to enter into the departure procedure. So we simply depict it as a dotted line to help you. You'll be receiving radar vectors in most cases. Alternate advisor was added. When you select the alternate, you're now given choices of nearby alternates that appear reasonable, at least to ForeFlight. You're given a graphical depiction of the METAR information at each of those at the current time, as well as the distance and those type of runways that you have available to you and the procedures you have available to you. Select a runway on maps. If you go to the departure airport or at the arrival airport and you tap on the bubble, you'll be given a choice of selecting the runway as depicted here. When you do that, in this case, we're going to select 17 right. And then you see in the bubble entry that it now chooses KDWH runway 17 right. But you need to notice one other thing that a lot of pilots don't catch. That if you zoom in, we've added chevrons to the runway of choice. This will help you during your ground maneuvers to get to the runway and confirmation that in fact you are on the runway that you're intended to be on. Now from an arrival standpoint, we selected runway 25 at Eagle. And notice that the approach course is loaded with chevrons as well. Helps you get aligned on the proper runway. It's another situational awareness check that ForeFlight has added to ensure your safety and consciousness that you're doing what you intend to do. Enhanced approach procedure markers. We demonstrated this earlier in 3D, but if you notice that the initial approach fix, the intermediate fixes, and the final approach fix all have notes on them now concerning any limitations that you may have. You see some hard altitude crossings that you have to maintain in order to cross powers in AWAC. And look out there, the initial approach fix. There's a speed restriction for that one of 210 knots. There's where you see them. NOTAM warnings in the route editor. I'm sure most of you notice now that when you build a flight plan, oftentimes you get a little red exclamation point above the bubble depicting your departure or your destination airport. If you haven't done this before, do it now. You should tap on that bubble and immediately it's going to draw attention to a view alert NOTAMs for that particular airport. I'm demonstrating Houston Intercontinental because there were NOTAMs there at the time I made this slide. And if you tap on that, you get the most recent and probably the most applicable NOTAMs. You can read those on detail. But if you want to see all NOTAMs, note that you're given that choice down below in green. Georeference SIDs and stars are now in Procedure Advisor. They are shown on the map. Please note that this is a Jeppesen feature only. You have to have a Jeppesen feature in order to do this, as the government SIDs and stars are not georeferenced at this time. We now depict plain text PIREPs on the map. So if you tap on a PIREP, you not only get what I'll call the code that you have to interpret at the top, but you also get a description of what that PIREP is all about. In this case down below, you notice it's continuous, light, occasional, moderate. But make note of one thing. You have to have the PIREPs overlay selected in order to see the PIREPs. So don't go looking for PIREPs unless you have that overlay selected. Marked positions is a very powerful feature that came out recently. Let's talk about this one. There's numerous applications for this. Points of interest. Search and rescue people are going to, I believe, use this extensively. Recording oceanic crossing, reporting waypoints, and things like that are just examples of how marked positions can be used. And what this does is it will drop markers along the route during your flight, and you choose when to drop them. And then afterwards, you can view or share them. Each marker will capture the time, the GPS coordinates, the altitude, the speed, and it will allow for notes. You can rename these markers or just keep the name as designated, which is going to be a time. And you can change any values on them except for the time. You can save them to create a user waypoint so you can use them in future flights. Now, these will disappear 15 minutes after the flight in their raw sense of marked positions, but they are retained in track logs and in flights view, as long as that flight view is active during the active time that you made those markers. You can export these marked positions in the form of a file and view them in other apps, such as Google Earth, for documentation purposes. This is a performance plan feature only. So let's see how these work. First thing you got to do is you have to turn them on. So when you're in Maps view, go to the settings icon, which is the gear in the upper left-hand corner, and you will scroll down and you will see the marked position toggle. It will probably be defaulted off the first time you open this. Turn it on. And then once you do that, you will notice that you have a new icon along the left side. It's in the form of a teardrop. That is your marked position toggle button. You're going to tap that every time you want to mark a position. So when you do that, I tap that teardrop icon and I get a bright green teardrop on the map at my current location. And immediately it will pop up an information box saying, you just marked a position. And right then you can give it a name. You note that it gives it the time and your location, the altitude, and the speed. Now, I don't show any speed here because I'm in my office making this slide. But if you were at altitude and flying along, you would have a speed depicted. So feel free to make a change to any of those, with the exception of the time. I encourage you to go out into our video library and take a look at the video that Sam made on marked positions, because it goes into a lot greater detail as to how these work, and I don't have time to cover it in this short webinar. It's a very powerful feature, and I think you're going to find that it's very helpful and applicable to just about every pilot in one sense or another. Now let's talk about our latest releases. For those of you that keep track, this would be releases 12.4 and 12.5. We'll be coming out with 12.6, maybe about the time that you're viewing this webinar. But anyway, we're going to focus on the releases and the features that were contained in those two releases because they were chock full of very powerful and useful things. The first is internet traffic via FlightAware. I'm hoping most of you have already seen this. What we did here is in conjunction with FlightAware, we are streaming liable global traffic directly into ForeFlight. This is the same traffic map layer used to describe and display ADS-B traffic, and it's accessible anytime you have internet on the ground. So if you have an ADS-B in device, now you can get internet traffic. You can get traffic in the air via the ADS-B network and on the ground via the internet, and it will essentially look the same. It will switch automatically over to ADS-B with an external device when you're in your aircraft and you disconnect from the internet, you're ready to go fly. It displays the airborne and ground traffic via the internet, as we described, just like ADS-B, and it will show upon tapping altitude and tail numbers and many other details available with the tap or at a glance for most of those traffic targets. It uses distinct position reports from FlightAware, and it interpolates movement and displays it very smoothly on the map. And if you demonstrate it and test it, you will see what I'm referring to as smooth movements. And unlike a lot of these other features we've talked about, internet traffic is available to all subscription plans, so everybody has it available to them. So let's take a look. I've got a slide here. This is Houston Intercontinental Airport, and we're going to put it into motion. and you're going to see the activity of aircraft going into Houston Intercontinental. Note the smooth movement. You can tap on any one of these targets and get a pop-up window with more description as to what that is. That's a United Airlines flight, a Boeing 737. We'll tap on another one that's a little further out. And then we're going to zoom in on George Bush Intercontinental and notice that we have some ground traffic that's depicted with those beige arrows. And those two are moving along as well. We have an aircraft that's approaching just about ready to touch down on runway 09. That was internet traffic. Let's take a look at slide out more menu and edit tab order. If you noticed that the more tab in the bottom right hand corner, which we used to show, now displays a compact menu on the right side, such as this. But you can do a lot with this as well. You can downloads and settings and other infrequently used tabs appear as modals that you can quickly dismiss by swiping them down from the top. So if you tap on settings and you go through your settings, when you're finished, just swipe down and it will be eliminated. Most tabs open full screen with double columns now, so you'll have better viewing. This is an example of the track logs, where you got your selection of track logs on the left, and then the highlighted track log, you show the visual description on the right. The last tab you open now moves into what we call the dynamic tab for quick jumps. So if you notice at the bottom, just to the right of checklist, I now have track logs because that was the last tab I opened from the More menu. You can edit the tab order and it will rearrange that tab bar. So if you tap on Edit Tab Order, you get those very familiar 3 horizontal lines next to each one, and then you just take your finger and you move them around. Slide them up, slide them down, put them whatever order you want them to be in. Now, when you do the tab order, that does not sync between the devices, so please take note. If you reorder the tabs on your iPad, you're going to need to reorder them on your second iPad or on your iPhone to the way you want to see them. We have made a great step forward in pairing the iPhone to act and look pretty much like the iPad in flight plan view. Those of you that use an iPhone have probably noticed this. We've got everything that the iPad has with the exception of profile view, and that's pretty much a landscape or space available problem that we just have yet to deal with. Multitasking support on the iPad. This has been enhanced and we now support iOS multitasking, allowing the use of ForeFlight in a split screen or a slide over mode with other apps. To do this, you're going to open ForeFlight in the split screen with another supported app because you're going to first open one of the other apps, then swipe up slowly from the bottom to show the iOS dock. Then you're going to drag the second op to either side of the screen and let it go. And you can drag the separator to change the relative size of one side versus the other side. And then you dismiss it by dragging it off to the side. If you want to open ForeFlight with an unsupported app using slide over, and there are some of those, then open that unsupported app first and then drag ForeFlight from the dock up into the screen and let it go. So let's demonstrate this. We have ForeFlight open. We're going to slide slightly up to expose the dock. We're going to take Safari, move it off to the right, and now we have Safari. In this case, I've got it open to an ESPN website. And you can go back and forth. It's almost like having 2 iPads open at one time. Right now I'm working on ForeFlight on the left, and I'm going to move over and scroll the ESPN articles. And then I'm going to go back to ForeFlight on the left. This is the multitasking and slide overview offered in ForeFlight and on your iPad. We also now graphically depict aircraft type restrictions in the Procedure Advisor. So when you pull up Procedure Advisor, you will notice and be noted that if certain ones are limited to the type of aircraft, in this case jet, The Dryer 2 is also jet, as is the Neander 3. But the Sway 4 is turboprop and piston only. And you get that graphical description right there in Procedure Advisor. And we did a few more things. We were pretty busy. We've rearranged a lot of the presentation of where the frequencies, services, AFDs, and more tabs are on the airport's view. Forecast discussion's been nested under the TAF section. Airport pop-up view on the map now uses the same view as the airports. On maps, we move profile buttons over to the right side of the flight plan editor. We show quick buttons on the left. We call those our quick filters. Give those a look. And in support, we created a whole new support tab for support as opposed to being embedded in some of the other tabs. And then the very latest things that came out, we've got 3 of them I want to draw attention to. We now graphically describe hotspots on airport diagrams. You can see those highlighted in orange in this particular case. And then wait for it, we now have a timer. A timer is now built into ForeFlight. If you haven't noticed yet, go to More, and down at the bottom, you have a timer. It can be count down or count up. This is graphically shown as count up. But if you want to change it to count down, just tap it. It will ask you to tap to set. It's going to ask you how many minutes you want to set for. And I set this for 2 minutes. And then you start it. Finally, we have an offline address search. This is performance subscribers only. In order to access this, you're going to download another database. Go to Downloads. Down at the bottom, you will notice a download line called Street Addresses. It's defaulted off for the first time. Activate that, and then you're able to search and offline for street addresses in the United States. That, in summary, is a highlight of all our new features in the last year. It's a lot of them. I'm sure you're going to want to get more information. As always, I want to refer you to several different places. Our pilot's guide is always available to you online or in-app. If you want to get it in-app and load it onto your iPad, as I do, and I oftentimes refer to it, go to Documents, Catalog, and in the drive called ForeFlight. I demonstrated that, so you all know how to find that now. Visit us on our website at www.foreflight.com/videos for an absolutely exceptional list of videos on every feature we offer, along with common practice, user tips, things like that. And as always, please reach out to us at team@foreflight.com. I and 25 or 30 of my colleagues are fanatical pilot support specialists. And we are here to help you with your problems, your issues, to help you train, to help you find resources, or in those rare occasions where you find that there's a problem with ForeFlight, it's not behaving properly. We want to know, we want to help you. We have more webinars, sign up for them. We have our pilot command series at foreflight.com/PIC. We also have ForeFlight on frequency, foreflight.com/on frequency. And with that, let's go off into the Q&A section of this webinar. We once again want to thank you before we start this for participating in the Spirit of Aviation Week, our virtual week for the EAA 2020. ForeFlight is very proud to be part of this, and we look forward to your feedback and support.
All right, thanks, Phil. We're going to move on to answering some of these questions that you all have submitted. Question number 1, this is in relation to the takeoff and landing performance feature. This person said, could ForeFlight calculate the actual takeoff and landing distance? And I believe this question, they put actual in all caps, so I assume that they're referring to what Phil said about the fact that this is basically calculating predicted takeoff and landing. Phil, are you here to answer that?
Yeah, I'm here, and you're correct. The calculations are predictive. They're using the performance data provided by the manufacturer contained in the pilot operating handbook to predict the takeoff and landing distances given the conditions, both atmospheric and runway conditions that you put forth in the app. So it's predicting what it does. You should probably pay close note to how accurate the predictions are compared to the actual performance you've seen when you take off and land, and then look at the variables that might have contributed to that differential.
Thanks, Phil. Next question here. What's added with the Pro Plus plan over the Basic Plus plan? So can you briefly cover some of the major features that you get with that $100 upgrade?
Oh, there's a lot, and to properly answer this, I would encourage the customers to take a look at our website, www.foreflight.com, and look at the various features that are. But the two that jump out to me that I always encourage people to get are the aeronautical data maps, which really go a long ways towards decluttering and giving your map view a professional look. And then the georeferencing capability is contained in the Pro Plus. And when you are, if for example, if you're a student pilot, you move into instrument training and start using plates and things for approaches and departure procedures and things like that, georeferencing is just worth its weight in gold. Those are the two things that jump out, but there's a whole lot more. And to give fair justice to that question, take a look at our website. We've got tables which will outline the features contained in every one of the plans that we offer.
Yeah, and foreflight.com/pricing is specifically where you can go to see that table. One just correction there, Phil, maybe you were thinking of the old Basic plan, but Basic Plus does also include the aeronautical map. So you do get that aeronautical map with both Basic Plus and Pro Plus. But like Phil said, it's the georeferencing with Pro Plus, which is one of the great big features there. But definitely for a full breakdown of those two plan levels and the features in each, please go to foreflight.com/pricing and you can see all of that.
Thanks for the correction, Sam.
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
Next up, I only have two choices for my aircraft runway conditions, dry paved and dry grass. Why are there not more?
Okay, that's a good question. We get that quite a bit. And the reason why is the manufacturer has not provided the data in the pilot operating handbook for those other environmental conditions, such as wet grass or wet paved. We are using the data that the manufacturers provide and nothing more. We're not going out and trying to create or figure out what we think wet paved would be if the manufacturer does not provide it. So one manufacturer may provide, say, 6 conditions, say dry pavement, wet pavement, slippery pavement, things like that, and then the same for grass. Others may not. So that is pretty much a manufacturer by manufacturer restriction, and that's the reason for why your choices may be limited.
Good answer. Next up here, when selecting a departure runway, will that runway selection be addressed in the departure procedure?
No, it's going to, selecting the departure runway is going to identify it on your flight plan, and it's going to highlight the departure runway with chevrons and the extensions and things like that so that you're currently oriented. But depending on the departure procedure, it's going to pretty much take you from the end of the runway, or maybe in this case, the center of the airport, to that first entry point or transition point into the departure procedure. So it's oftentimes the assumption is, and I showed the dotted line vectoring, it's reflecting the fact that you're probably going to be vectored or following some type of instructions from air traffic control, whether it be tower or TRACON, depending on where you are, to get you into that departure procedure at that transition point, or into that entry port is probably the better word to use.
All right, next up, if the full length of the runway is not available, can ForeFlight provide an estimated available runway length at taxiway while holding short?
No, I think they're probably referring to, well, there could be two reasons why you're not going to get the full length of the runway. One is you might have a displaced threshold of some form or fashion at your airport, or you do a mid runway takeoff. You take off from a taxiway that is not at the end. And ForeFlight really doesn't know if you're going to be doing that. So the calculations are representing the fact that the entire runway is available to you, and that we're doing the calculations based on all the conditions of the runway over that entire length and telling you the distance of pavement that you need or grass, depending on the configuration of your runway, and then the distance required to clear that obstacle. Now, that may be something that changes in the future, but at this time, the answer would be no.
All right, next up, for experimentals, can the pilot enter aircraft performance data themselves rather than just using what ForeFlight has?
The answer to that is largely, well, it's a sort of a maybe answer. The ForeFlight performance profiles that we build that are the high quality ones, those are not applicable to experimentals. And the reason why is because there's too much variation in the experimentals or the home builts. And from one model to the next, there's the potential for too much variance. And that's just a decision that our engineers made when we embarked on building that feature. But that being said, the best thing to do above and beyond, underneath the ForeFlight performance profiles, you have two profile selections that you can make. You have what we call the basic profiles, which constitute essentially speed, climb or descent rate, and fuel burn for the climb phase of your flight and your descent phase. And then during cruise, you got speed and cruise. But better than that, you can build, and this would be applicable only to performance subscribers, you can build by altitude profiles, in which case you can go in and put in to a table, and this is done only on ForeFlight Web. You can build a table of performance of all the various altitudes that your aircraft may be flying, from ground level all the way up to your operating ceiling. And at each of those altitudes, you can depict the speed, the fuel burn, things like that. So the quality of the calculations, therefore, will be much better in a by altitude profile than they will in a basic or a simple profile. And that's probably a good solution for those that have experimental aircraft where you've got some data available, or you've gathered your own data through your own performance testing and flying. So I encourage you, if you need more information, check out our video or our support center, because we have articles on how to do that. Or if you still have doubts, just reach out to us at team@ForeFlight, and we'll help you get that table built.
All right, next up, can messages be added to the timer? Like, for example, telling you to switch tanks or turn inbound, or just anything like that, that'll give you an instruction once the timer ends?
No, not at this time. It's pretty much one timer at a time, and giving it an identification or name, I'm not aware that that feature exists at this time. But I would think that with time, we'll probably expand the use of the timer. We're just very thankful to and glad to be providing a timer now for either a countdown or a count up timer for our users and our pilots to be able to use without ever leaving the app.
Okay, next question. Can audio warnings on ForeFlight be programmed to be heard on a headset? At full volume, an iPad is still very hard to hear during a flight.
Yes, you have to Bluetooth connect your headset to ForeFlight. Absolutely correct. If you don't have your headset configured such that it can hear the audio portion of ForeFlight through your iPad, then if you're relying on that speaker on the side or underneath the iPad, then you're right, you're probably not going to hear it. And so you want to Bluetooth connect your headset into the ForeFlight app on your device. Now, depending on your panel and how you're hooked up, there may be a couple ways you do that. But a Bluetooth connection to headsets is possible, and I encourage you to check that out. If you need any help with that, then write us, as we oftentimes tell our customers, a team at ForeFlight, and tell us how you're hooked up. Tell us what kind of headset you have and the type of iPad you have, and if your avionics, if you're kind of going through your avionics panel as well, and we'll try to help you put all those pieces together and get you set up.
All right, we've got a few more questions. How are displaced thresholds taken into account when ForeFlight calculates runway distance requirements?
I think, as previously stated, they're not. We're taking into account, and you're going to have to check. I would double confirm that the available runway that you have available to you for a takeoff from one end to the other does take into account the displace threshold. So I think that's a quality check you want to do to assure yourself as a pilot that you know exactly the distance you've got available to you, and that ForeFlight or any other app for that matter isn't taking into account a displace threshold that they think you can go up to for landing, for takeoff purposes, and giving you an incorrect available runway. I hope that answers that question, Sam.
Yeah, I believe it did.
Okay.
Next up here, marked positions are deleted in 15 minutes. How do I save them?
That's a good question, and I think that let's expand upon a little about those marked positions. It's a new feature. It's very powerful. What happens after 15 minutes is they disappear from the map, but they're not deleted from the app. They're still out there, and there's two ways, namely, that you can get them back or you can view them. Now, if you recorded a track log, those marked positions associated with your flight will be preserved and contained within the track log. So you have the ability of pulling up that track log and you'll see those marked positions. Now, another real nifty feature, and I didn't go into this, is that those marked positions are saved. And if you go into flights and you create a flight, even a new flight, but you back up the times that cover between takeoff and landing, the times during which those marked positions were captured, then those marked positions will appear on that flight. So in essence, you can use old marked positions for a new flight by playing or tricking kind of the times. So I encourage you to try that out. And as mentioned, give the video on our library a check out, because Sam goes into that and describes that in great detail. It's a very powerful feature that we really haven't drawn a lot of attention to, and that's another way in order to use those marked positions. And obviously the third one is to save each of those marked positions into a user waypoint, and then they can be used for future flight planning.
All right, we have just one more question here. It's also about marked positions, and it says, can you send another user a marked position in flight as well as if connected with Wi-Fi?
I don't believe you can send them in flight because you're not connected to the internet while you're in flight. But you've got the capability of taking those marked positions and viewing them in your flight, in the flights tab. And down at the bottom, you will see a line that says marked positions. And then that will create a file that contains nothing but marked positions, and you have the ability to send those off elsewhere. You can send them to Google Earth, you can send them to other apps, and I believe you can send them via email to another user. So check that out.
Yeah, and it's a good point to mention with that you can export those marked positions as KML files, and so someone else using ForeFlight could actually just take that file and, or rather, you would export all of the marked positions in a single file, and someone else could simply import that into ForeFlight and see them displayed right on the map as sort of as waypoints, as custom waypoints. So that's an option. You also have the option of sharing your entire recorded track log along with the marked positions. And those can also be imported, though you can't import it as a track log. Someone else could simply import it as a map layer.
Yeah, and what led to the question, obviously, is my statement and the fact that they disappear after 15 minutes. So I want to make sure the operative word there is they disappear from the map. They are not deleted from the app. They're still there. You may need to take a couple steps, as Sam and I have both outlined, to preserve them, but they can live a long and healthy life in ForeFlight and be preserved for documentation or for future use in a number of different ways.
Yep, exactly. So with that, we're going to go ahead and call this one. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Like we've been saying this entire time, if you have any questions that didn't get answered during this webinar, or if any other random questions about ForeFlight pop into your head, just email us at team@foreflight.com. We're always there. We're always ready to help out our customers and not non-customers with any questions they have about ForeFlight, about using ForeFlight. So email us there. Go visit any of the other links that you see on your screen right now for resources, especially that link on the right under that nice graphic, foreflight.com/EAA. We will be hosting twice daily webinars through Saturday. And so we will also be having, in addition to this one, a power users webinar and a ForeFlight fundamentals webinar. So please go to that webpage and register for as many of those webinars as you think you can attend. And if you can't attend them, we will also be uploading recordings of those webinars to that same webpage. So if you missed half of this one or you wanted to see one of the other ones, just go there and you'll be able to see recordings of them. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on the next webinar.